we're very lucky to have with us live in the studios this morning Craig Salins. Craig Salins is Executive Director at Washington Public Campaigns. He has an extensive background in program planning, grant writing, community organizing, and public policy work. A former Vista volunteer and Head Start director, he has directed advocacy organizations on consumer issues, economic cooperatives, and healthcare reform. He has served on the boards of Seattle Pike Place Market Preservation and Development Authority, the Puget Consumers Co-op, the Central Area Motivation Program, and 4 years during the 1970s, the New Jersey Governor's Advisory Committee on Social Services. For several terms, he chaired the Issues Committee on the Washington 36th District Democrats and led lobbying efforts in Olympia on behalf of the King County Democrats Legislative Action Committee. And in 1993, he co-founded the Washington Single Payer Action Network and led the organization as volunteer president director for 4 years. Start out and tell us, what is Washington Public Campaigns?
Well, Mike, Washington Public Campaigns is an organization that wants to bring public financing to political campaigns at every level. This is actually something that's going on nationally, obviously. It's really needed in the U.S. Senate and the U.S. House. It's a program that is working now in several states, in Maine, in Arizona, in North Carolina, in New Mexico, at different levels for state legislature, for governor, for Supreme Court races, and in a couple of places for city council races. So we're an organization that wants to let the public know about this. We want them to know how well it works. We're really wanting to bring it here to Washington State.
And define for me, if you would, what are clean elections?
Well, clean elections, and incidentally, that's a nickname or a term that was given to the law when it was passed in Maine a little over 10 years ago. Essentially what it is that anybody who wants to run for office could qualify for public money to run their campaign, and the deal is that they swear off taking any private money from any contributors or using any of their own personal money. The reason why we need this really everywhere is because more and more campaigns are becoming expensive, too expensive, and the only people that are able to play in that game, if you will, are folks that have personal wealth or have a $1 million Rolodex where they can get big money backing for their campaign. One way that we sometimes say it is that it's almost as though there's an election before the election, before the voters even get to see names on the ballot, and that is the really big money in a back room choosing who will be eligible to run and who they will put their money behind. And those are the folks that end up on the ballot, so that we end up with a lot less choice. The nice thing about clean elections, or what we're starting to call it here, voter-owned elections, is that we can actually buy back our democracy. We can open the field so that more people can afford to run for office, not based on money, not based on whether they're able to raise money from donors, but whether they truly would be good at representing constituents and running on the issues. In a nutshell, that's it.
So what is the cost involved with us buying back our elections?
Well, actually, we've done some studies in Washington State that show that for less than $5 per person per year, we could finance campaigns for governor, all statewide races, insurance commissioner, governor, and so forth, and all state legislative races and upper-level judicial races, state Supreme Court. Now, we just had a recent victory, I might mention, in the legislature just literally in the last couple of weeks. Let me give a little background on that. In Washington State, back in the 1970s, Seattle and then King County had the first in the nation ever program where you could run for city council on public funds. It was a slimmer program. It was a matching program. But that actually ran for 5 election cycles, from 1979, 81, and then in the later 70s. That program was banned in 1992 by a little-known phrase in a statewide initiative that said public money can't be used for campaigns. And for the last 16 years, that ban has been in effect, so it wiped out Seattle and King County's program. Well, this year, tremendous victory. The legislature overturned, with our grassroots support, actually with a lot of grassroots effort from all over the state, we passed what we were calling the Local Choice Local Option Bill, which lifted that state ban and gives permission once again to cities and counties to establish their own public financing programs for local office, for city council, county council, mayor, and so forth. All of a sudden now, Seattle and King County, Tacoma, Snohomish County, Spokane, are taking a look at the possibility of local programs. We think it's tremendous. We're working closely with members of the city council and the mayor's office in Seattle, and with staff and council people from the county to try to create programs quite possibly this year that would be on the ballot in November. So it is very possible that public financing could be available for city council races next year, and for mayor and possibly county council.
So how realistic do you think that is of that happening with the current climate, both at city council and at the mayor's office?
Well, here's what it would take. I'd have to say it's better than 50-50. It's not a slam dunk. When the local option law passed and was signed by the governor and down in Olympia, there was a provision tacked onto it that said any local city or county or local jurisdiction that creates a local program has to submit that program to the voters for an up or down vote in a referendum. It was actually a way of making sure that not only local officials wanted to establish a program, but that the voters in that area approved. So what would have to happen, for example, in Seattle is, first of all, the city council would have to design a program and pass it as an ordinance, which they are on track to do. It's underway. We are working with them to do that. That would have to pass as an ordinance by July in order to be in time to be before the voters in November, if you see. So the two-step process is create a program in Seattle, enact it as an ordinance. That's step one. And part of enacting it, by the way, would be appropriating the budget dollars to do it. And then it would be put on the ballot and go before the voters in November. We think that voters in Seattle would support such a program. They did before. We've had the program before. We could renew it again. So it's likely. And I might add that a program like that in the city would cost, again, it depends a little on program design, but it would cost somewhere between $4 and $5 per person per year. This is totally affordable. For that, we could be voting for candidates for city council who truly are not fettered. They're not limited by who gave them big money to run. And so decisions that would start to be made by the mayor's office and the city council would truly represent the interests of neighborhoods and people in Seattle. I'm not implying that that has never been true, but we could be assured of that. So we hope something like that will happen.
And so would participation in these voter-owned elections, would that be voluntary or mandatory?
It would be voluntary. And let me describe a little bit how it works. I think listeners are interested in this. First of all, candidates that want to run for office would not have to. They could do the program. They could continue to run on private money, their own money, or donations. If a candidate wants to run on the public program with public funds, here's what they have to do. They would have to collect a set number of signatures from voters in their district backed by, let's say, a $5 contribution from each one. Everywhere around the country where these clean elections or voter-owned elections programs operate, the signature plus $5. $5 is the currency, if you will, to qualify. And the number of signatures that someone would have to collect could be anywhere in the neighborhood of 500 to 600, maybe 800. In Portland, Oregon, it's actually 1,000 signatures. the design of the program would set the number of signatures at a level where it's high enough that we screen out what you might call hobby candidates that are not serious. They just want their name on the ballot, but they don't really want to run for office. We want to screen those folks out. But serious candidates that would do a good job, they could collect enough signatures so they would qualify. Once those signatures plus the $5 are collected, they get turned into some commission that would be set up. In Seattle, it would probably be the Ethics and Elections Commission for validation to make sure the signatures are real people. Then the candidate qualifies and they are given a check, literally a sum of money, which is enough money to run their primary campaign. When they accept the check, they agree to take no more contributions from any private source, not to use any of their own personal money. So they're running their campaign only on the public funds that are provided. And that's how that's how expenditures are limited a little bit. That would be enough money to get your message out. It would be enough money to run a viable campaign, but not so much money that we're just spending money foolishly. Now, if that publicly financed candidate is outspent by an opponent who raises more money and spends more money, then there's a really cool feature, which is the rescue funds feature. The publicly financed candidate gets a dollar-for-dollar increase in the original allotment to keep up with any privately financed opponent. So it keeps the financial playing field completely level, and it makes these elections about issues, about representing voters, not about who can raise the most money. In essence, that's how the program works. And it's not just a good idea. It's actually working now in Portland, Oregon, in the city, in the state of Maine, in Arizona, and a lot of other places.
So let's say average citizen chooses to go along with this and is running against someone who chooses to be privately funded, and the privately funded person is being backed, like, let's say, one of our local billionaires, and they can just shovel literally millions into this campaign. Wouldn't that potentially break the bank on the reserves for clean elections?
Great question. And the answer is no, it would not, because actually the rescue funds, the fair fight funds, are capped at a certain multiplier above the opening amount. Typically, they're capped at, let's say, 3 times your starting amount. So we would know the overall costs of a program. And what actually happens is this. In areas where there's been a privately financed candidate that's just a gazillionaire, and can spend unlimited amounts of money, if they keep spending, such that the publicly financed candidate then gets the matching funds up to a certain level, and then they're capped at that level, by that time, the voters know who is trying to buy the election for themselves versus the publicly financed candidate. By that time, there's media coverage of this. People know. So the program works quite well. We've seen situations in other states where privately financed candidates actually outspent a publicly financed candidate, but the publicly financed guy won or woman won because they were able to get their message out. They had enough funds to do that.
Okay. How about also the number of candidates for a given position or across the board? Is there a limit then on, again, based on the funding that's coming in?
No limit on who can run. What's actually happened is the field has opened up so that we're seeing more women run, more people of color, especially more people of limited economic means who nonetheless do a great job representing their district. Because there is a qualifying bar that you have to get over, which is a certain number of voter signatures to qualify. It's not unlimited, but we are seeing an opening of the field. Typically, there may be 3, 4, maybe even 5 candidates in a race. And then of course it's narrowed down in the primary. And I might mention too that in other states where this happens, there has been no overall shift in political party. It's been about the same number of Democrats, Republicans, but it does open the door for independents to run. A voter-owned elections program is actually silent on the issue of what party you represent. It doesn't matter. The point is that if you can get the number of signatures to qualify, you can run. And then what happens is organizations that back a candidate, either a political party, it might be a union, it might be a neighborhood civic organization, can put their funds into getting the word out about issues and about where the candidates stand on the issues and get out the vote efforts and things like that. The great thing about public financing is that we stop trying to purchase a candidate. We stop trying to buy a candidate with great big campaign contributions. That's the sense in which we're really buying back our democracy.
So I would have to imagine that a lot of politicians, and more so the two large parties that run this country, would be opposed to this concept of voter-owned elections. What's your sense of that?
Well, it's kind of mixed. Actually, what happened 10, 12 years ago in Maine when a program like this first was brought forward, it actually passed by a citizen initiative. It was put on the ballot. In the state of Maine, the State Labor Council backed the program from day one, and the political parties did. There is opposition, and every year in Arizona and some of the other states, there are limited efforts to try to cancel these programs, which so far have failed everywhere. They really have not been able to because the truth is that the small business community likes it, the voters like it, the candidates like it. We, for a public forum that we had here in Seattle, you remember in January of last year, brought a representative from the state of Maine, another guy from Arizona. We had author David Sirota come here. Linda Valentino from Maine said over 80% of the legislature there is now elected on public financing, and everybody in Maine just loves the program. They take it as if like gravity. It's just natural. It's the natural order of things. And there are public policy results that are really great, too. The state of Maine, once they had enough people elected on public financing, they could stare down the big Wall Street interests that previously had been trying to buy public policy, and they stared down the pharmaceutical and the insurance industry. They passed the toughest law in the nation, bringing down the price of prescription drugs. They stared down the tobacco interest, and they passed tougher laws dealing with teenage smoking and things like that. We get better public policy because candidates and incumbents are no longer having to spend their time dialing for dollars. Instead, they're spending all of their hours doing what we pay them to do, and that is represent their constituents and craft good legislation. They're no longer worried about where the dollars are going to come from for their next reelection campaign. And there's another neat feature. In the state of Maine, when public financing went in, previously, sometimes incumbents would not face an opponent, so you had a lot of races where there was no opposition. Once public financing was available, out of 151 legislative districts in Maine, 149 of them had a challenger. 149 out of 151. Even with that, in many cases, the incumbents did win, but they won because they were forced to walk their districts and get to know their voters. In essence, they became better legislators, and they focused their attention on legislation and representing their district instead of raising money. So public financing is a way to get better representation. It opens the field, more women, more folks can run, different walks of life. They don't have to worry about raising money. They can focus on good legislation. Do I sound like I think it's a terrific program or what?
So have you seen, I know in Maine they saw a shift where when public financing was first instituted that it was about 30-some% participating in it of those elected.
Initially.
Yeah, and then it's up to 80-some% now. Have you seen similar trends in the other states that have enacted this?
It's gradually rising, right? And there's a couple of other models that have come in. In North Carolina, they developed a model of public financing for state Supreme Court. That happened about 4 years ago. Last year in North Carolina, they added 3 statewide positions: state attorney general, state insurance commissioner, and the superintendent of public instruction. In New Mexico, they have public financing for their utilities commission, which sets, it's called the corporations division, but they set utility rates and so forth. In New Jersey, they adopted a law that on a trial basis did public financing for 2 legislative districts. Then the next cycle, they expanded it to 3 legislative districts. So the program is gaining popularity and gaining public awareness around the country. We hope what we can do here, of course, is institute a program for the city of Seattle and for King County and maybe a couple of other local jurisdictions. By the way, I might mention there's a couple of upcoming meetings about this. Short notice, but we've got a community briefing Sunday afternoon, day after tomorrow, at Northgate Library at 3:30. We've got another meeting next Wednesday evening, April 2nd, at Central Seattle Community College. These are open community meetings to explain this program to people and tell people what's happening at the City and County Council to get this underway. And then there's going to be a big community meeting sponsored by King County Council in May. On May 19th, the King County Council as a whole is having a town hall meeting up at Shoreline, at the Shoreline Conference Center. That'll be at 6 o'clock in the evening, May 19th. And Mike, this information is always posted on our website, which is washclean.org, www.washclean.org.
You were saying that the Seattle City Council seems like they're open to this. What was your impression? Maybe you already said this. What's your impression then for at the King County level there? Is this upcoming meeting specifically about this issue, or?
It is specifically about this. What happens is each King County Council member gets to have one of these town hall meetings in their district every year. And so Councilman Bob Ferguson chose to have the Shoreline meeting in May be about this topic. So it'll literally be an hour and a half community forum where folks can come forward and express their opinion about this. There have been other town hall meetings like that elsewhere around the county on different topics, but it just happens that in May it'll be on that topic. I think it's going to be challenging to get a program designed in the city and the county this year, but the challenge will not be that we have to invent a program. You know, the science of designing these public financing programs really has been done, if you will. We know how to do it. I think the challenge will be, can we get the word out to enough voters to understand what it is so that they would support it at the ballot box, and also that they would support the, frankly, tiny amount of public dollars that it would take to put in a program like this? There's no question that it costs some public money to have a public financing program. That's the nature of what it is. And I'm often asked, well, gosh, Craig, should we really be spending public tax money on political campaigns instead of sidewalks, potholes, daycare centers, and so forth? And here's how I answer that. Until we run our campaigns and elections where people can run on public financing so that they are not beholden to private special interest dollars, especially big money, until we do that, we will never get the kind of public policies that really benefit our neighborhoods and constituents totally. Once we have publicly elected officials, we can then start to budget the money for potholes and sidewalks and after-school programs. And it's affordable. $5 a year per person. Listen, we can do this. We really can. I can think of some recent decisions in Seattle where some multi-million dollars of public money was put into various projects that were really earmarked for special interest. Maybe listeners out there are quite aware of, what I call a toy train that, runs from downtown to South Lake Union. It's probably a good idea, but come on, $50 million, those are monies that are needed in a few other ways. I think we would start to get decisions that really benefit neighborhoods and people when we have public financing.
I believe I read somewhere that the level of voter participation in states and municipalities that have passed voter-owned elections has gone up. Have you heard anything?
Absolutely, it has. I think that we all are watching a situation now where a lot of young people are saying, when you ask them, why should I bother to vote? The choices that are out there don't feel like real choices to me. Nobody's running that really represents my interest. Once public financing programs have gone into effect, then there are more choices on the ballot, and the data shows that voter participation has actually gone up. Absolutely.
All right. So with that, we are unfortunately out of time. So I want to thank you very much for coming in and spending time with us this morning.
Sure. Mike, thanks for having me. Glad to do it. Glad to be here.
Again, we've just been talking with Craig Salins. He is Executive Director of Washington Public Campaigns. And again, you can find out more via their website, washclean.org.